Whilst the Tory party hasn't been doing at all well in the polls, its leader, Kemi Badenoch, has actually been polling very well. She has sometimes been the most popular party leader. She thereby personally has a certain clout with the country. She saw the previously discussed bout of left-wing pearl clutching that followed the SODEM protests as Keir Starmer resigned, and she weaponized it. For her, it presented an opportunity to reopen the efforts to close down the SODEM protest in Westminster.
You may recall that our speakers have been seized on a few occasions, and the last resulted in Steve going to court. There were various shenanigans during the court appearances, such as the police failing to disclose evidence in a timely manner at the first hearing, prompting an adjournment. And at the second hearing, persons connected with a witness almost forcing another adjournment by filming inside the court.
I mean, who films inside a court? Have you been in a court? There's posters everywhere telling you to not use cameras. So who's going to do that? I'll tell you who. The family of one of the witnesses for the prosecution, who just happened to be Suella Braverman's assistant. That's who. His folks couldn't read the posters, apparently. After the police's failure to disclose evidence had already forced an adjournment at the first hearing, thus making for a delay of a few months, which permitted the police to maintain their suppression of our protest pending a judgment they had unilaterally delayed, well, you make whatever you will of this curious inability of the parents of one of Braverman's staff to read posters, which almost forced a second adjournment.
Nevertheless, Steve won that case on the grounds of reasonable excuse, that excuse being the exercising of our constitutional right to protest. Obviously. But Badenoch adopted her pose of righteous ire in defence of poor Ickle Starmer, who ought, she said, to have been afforded the reverence of a cessation of protest, whilst he admitted that everyone thought he was rubbish and should go.
No, it was a disgrace. Keir Starmer should have been allowed a much more dignified exit. This is not something that we should allow outside Downing Street. But do you know the reason why?
How do you allow for protest then?
So the reason why he is allowed, he's been prosecuted before, is because of the Convention on Human Rights. The ECHR rears its head yet again. This is why we have said we would leave. We're not going to allow that piece of legislation to stop us from governing our country. We look like a clown country when people like Steve Bray are doing that to a prime minister. Like, we've got no control over anything that happens here. It's something that should be stopped. He's been out there for 10 years making Parliament and Downing Street look like a clown show, and he needs to be stopped.
As James O'Brien said.
And this is a clever move by her because she's doing it after Keir Starmer's resignation speech was disrupted, whereas if she was doing it after one of her own speeches had been disrupted or one of her own people's speeches had been disrupted, it would sound less authentic and less persuasive. But
it opened another front on her attacking of the ECHR, because the ruling in SODEM's favour had maintained we had a reasonable excuse under Articles 10 and 11 of the ECHR, namely the right to protest. The court recognised that we were not merely being a nuisance, as Badenoch maintains, but that, rather, we were exercising our constitutional rights by making a protest against our government in Westminster.
Badenoch was venturing an authoritarian buy one, get one free. She claimed that the playing of the Ode to Joy was an egregious assault upon the dignity of Sir Keir Starmer.
But that was only because it permitted her another stab at stopping the SODEM protest by blaming the ECHR for frustrating the authoritarian law previously promoted by her party, initially under Priti Patel and later under her erstwhile colleague, Suella Braverman, who now, of course, is a member of Reform UK, as are so many of Badenoch's other erstwhile Tory colleagues.
But who would be against the ECHR? Are not human rights a good thing? Churchill certainly thought so. Didn't you, Winnie? There he is. But that brings us back to our fundamental problem. The lack in the UK of a codified constitution that expressly protects people's rights.
That lack is why SODEM had to go to court to have our constitutional right to protest asserted. The Tory government of the time concocted a law that sought to suppress the citizens' right to protest, prompting great concern amongst parliamentarians from across the House. And while citizens of other countries might simply point at their constitutions and so prevent such laws getting onto their statute book, in our system, the legislature, on the instruction of the executive, can pass any assault upon our freedoms they like, and until the matter is put before a court, and the court rules that it is indeed unconstitutional and therefore unlawful, until then that law will stand. Thus was SODEM suppressed for months. But we were not alone. We also saw this when Gina Miller took the government to court over the executive's attempt to short-circuit Parliament under Theresa May.
We have to understand that my case is about a fundamental constitutional issue, which is only an act of Parliament, primary legislation, can establish or take away people's rights. So a motion with a timetable is really not good enough.
And with the prorogation debacle.
Do not let the government play down the seriousness of the judgment today. A unanimous judgment. They have spoken unequivocally. We have had twice in 3 years to come to the Supreme Court to ensure that the government does not put itself above the law.
As happened to SODEM, the executive is able to exploit the period between their enacting the law and it being challenged and overruled, and thus do they get to effectively outlaw certain groups or prevent certain actions for a time at least. A good example of this gaming of our system was the getting Republicans locked up overnight for the coronation. It would obviously have been ruled as unlawful had it lasted long enough to be challenged in court.
The authorities, however, didn't need to maintain the incarceration of uppity scum for more than a few hours. Indeed, they needed to keep this wheeze in reserve for future use. So they released those jailed as soon as possible once King Charles had done his pomp and circumstance bit, before legal challenges could proceed, because such legal challenges would have inevitably set the precedent that the authorities could not arbitrarily arrest Republican uppity scum whenever they felt like it. As long as the law remained untested, however, they could be bundled out of sight for long enough.
They got them pesky plebs banged up for just long enough, and the police get to keep the power to do exactly the same thing and bang up the revolting plebs come the next coronation. When in 1998 Parliament brought the ECHR into our courts, it was an attempt to address the deficit of rights for the citizenry in an uncodified constitution by allowing the precedents of the ECHR to be applied directly to rulings in UK courts. Yet another great British fudge, a cake-and-eat-it gambit that sought the benefits of integrating greater rights in a quasi-constitutional manner without disturbing the wider flexibility of our conventions-based constitution. Human rights are a good thing, after all.
However, just like the EU had, the ECHR has become a scapegoat for politicians who want to avoid public examination of their failings, and inadequacies. Indeed, certain amongst them have gone to some lengths to cultivate that scapegoat into a fully fledged bogeyman in the eyes of the ignorant.
Things they don't tell you about the ECHR.
The UK signed up to the ECHR not under Labour in 1998, but under Churchill in 1951. Churchill was dead keen on it. British lawyers were instrumental in its drafting, and British people have, in principle at least, had access to its protections ever since then. What actually happened in 1998 is that the ECHR was integrated with UK law so that British citizens who were entitled to enjoy its protections need not go to Strasbourg to invoke them. This saved time and expense, an expense that had often proved to be prohibitive in practice. And many a powerful person had been very happy to impose their will upon the plebs by exploiting that effective prohibition of expense. Integrating the ECHR in domestic law could at least end that patrician wheeze. So ready access to the ECHR was a fudge that, it was hoped, would enhance a rights culture for the people. It wasn't a Bill of Rights, but it did establish a shortcut of principles already enshrined in law, to which a lawyer or even the citizen themselves could make ready resort. Stripping out the ECHR from our laws now after 30 years is, like our leaving the EU, a further assault upon what have become quasi-constitutional protections in the absence of a Bill of Rights. You might say that our conventions protected us for decades, and yes, they did. But as the Gina Miller case and prorogation demonstrated, the executive now happily rides roughshod over our conventions.
And that's really the point of all this. The elites, who have worked tirelessly to capture the executive and our legislature, would prefer that we plebeian scum be entirely vulnerable to their will and their power, with no hope of redress.
And if all that ever restrained them were conventions, and they no longer respect those conventions, what protections do we have? This looming danger after the defeat of fascism was foreseen by Churchill, and thus he took a lead in developing the ECHR. I'll mention in passing that super injunctions, something impossible in most jurisdictions because the codified constitutions will not permit such things, are another expression of this elite capture. So, the party political partisanship of the commentariat, which, as we saw, favoured taking the mick out of the Tories, or less, but frowns upon Labour getting a dose of the same medicine.
I think that Steve Bray is his name, isn't it? I think he has delighted us for long enough.
Is here being used quite cleverly by Badenoch to discredit the ECHR.
The ECHR rears its head yet again. This is why we have said we would leave.
And thereby suppress what scant constitutional protection we uppity plebs are yet able to access. Thus is her attack on SODEM for being annoying when it is so very wickedly deploying songs in a wry and satirical manner. Nothing more than the fig leaf for a red in tooth and claw assault upon the defences we plebs can, for now at least, raise against overbearing authority in the UK. However, the naked hypocrisy of Badenoch in taking this line was soon made evident, as we shall see in the next video.
They have to be so bloody proud, proud to be a fascist. That is what our country has come to. Proud to be a fascist, hating all that's different or new.
If you've enjoyed this video, you know the score. Like, comment, share, subscribe to the account, and I'll make many, many more.